All right, so we'll jump on to our next one, which is the practical component. So the first thing we would want to look at will be the structure of the file again. So the first thing will be for us to look at just the file itself. So we'll go back to our Linux system and then we'll look at just the normal file structure. All right, so we'll log back into our account, osboxes.org. And then as we saw earlier on, the structure of the file will be something like this. But as I mentioned earlier on, by default, once we create a user or once we log in, like once we say start or deploy, say a Linux server, the Linux server will have that etc file, or sorry, the etc directory. So if we go back to our root and we do ls, you see that we have a etc somewhere, and that etc will contain certain things about some user information. So when we do etc and we go in there, we have various things there. One of the items will be the password. So if I do a cat password, it's showing me some few stuff. And as I mentioned earlier on, I mentioned that with every system that we work on, we have 3 different types of users. The first one is the root user, as I mentioned earlier on, sometimes referred to as a super user. So if we scroll up, let's see whether we can find our root user. So the first one is our root user. This is our root user. So the root user is telling us that the root user has its own password and the password is X. X means that that password is hidden, so it cannot be found here. Now, we also mentioned that it will have some groups. And again, the root doesn't, technically the root is a root. So technically the root user is the root group. And then also we have the kind of bash they're using. And we've seen that the bash is the shell they're using. We've seen that with this particular user, it's using the bash shell. I also mentioned that we have other types of users, which are like the regular users. In our system, we have only one regular user. So if we see down here, we have OS boxes, which is our regular user. And again, this is the password column, and the password is not showing. It's an X. It's telling us that the password is hidden from plain sight. Another thing that we can see here is the user ID, which we mentioned earlier on. So the user ID is 1000. And then also the group ID is 1000 here. And then we have our home directory being home/boxes. And then our shell is the bin bash. So we're using the bash shell for this particular user. And also I mentioned that we have a third user, which is the service user. So every other one of them here are service users. So these ones are service users for the system. And then this is the TCP dump service user. So every service that's running on our system is having a service user account. So we don't just have one user, we have multiple users. So assuming you open a software, it's going to open or trigger some kind of service, and that service is going to have a user. So like mail is having a mail user service user account. Games is having a FTP is having that. So every single thing will have some kind of credential for its system.